Hello everybody, welcome back. Jim here, once again, beer in hand, relaxing in my cozy little Tokyo apartment and taking a little time to answer another viewer submitted question. And once again, we have a question from Monty on the Run on Facebook. Monty has asked if I keep all of the games I buy in my collection, or if I ever purge my collection from time to time. And the short answer to that question is yes, I have purged my collection before, and I very likely will again. There have been 2 times in the past that I've purged my collection, more or less, although the first time wasn't so much a purge because those things are still there. The first time was actually when I left home in 2008. I actually had a nice little collection of games, not the size that I have now, but it was, you know, it was respectable. It was mostly PS1 and PS2, Xbox, and some Dreamcast, and a little bit of SNES and Sega Genesis. And I also had quite the collection of figures and model kits and comic books. I had a pretty decent little comic book collection, and I had a bunch of movie and video game standees that I had taken from work when I was working at Sam Goody way back in the day when I was a teenager. So I had, you know, a lot of stuff in that collection: figures, games, comics, etc., etc. When it came time for me to leave home, I was leaving for basic training in the military, so I couldn't take any of that stuff with me. And since I wasn't going to be going home any time in the foreseeable future, it didn't really seem, you know, like necessary to keep my room the way it was, because I wasn't coming back to it. So me and a friend of mine packed all of my stuff up, and most of that stuff is still in storage. My comic book collection, actually, I left with a friend of mine who also collected comic books. And several years ago, he actually unfortunately had a house fire, and so I thought, you know, my comic book collection was lost. But then turns out my comics survived that fire somehow, even though it took up most of his house. So he returned all my comic books to my parents' house. So I haven't seen them yet, but apparently all of my comic books are sitting at my parents' house right now. As for the rest of that stuff, all those video games, figures, and everything, they're in storage. I left some of it with friends. It was like a diaspora of my collection. So that was the first time. Not so much a purge per se, but yeah, all of that stuff in my collection, no longer in my collection. Never sold any of it or anything like that. It's just I don't know, it's sitting somewhere collecting dust. The second time around was when I was living in Texas for that brief period. It was about 10 months. Long-time viewers of my channel will remember that time, kind of the dark times of the channel when I was in Texas instead of Japan. When I moved from Japan to Texas, that was when I really realized the scope of how much stuff I had amassed. I had been going out to hard offs and other various game stores almost every weekend, and just really buying up everything I could find, and because I had all this disposable income at the time, and I'm not afraid to say I'm not exactly the most fiscally responsible person. So when it came time to move, and I saw all of it like in boxes, and just that's when I realized the scope of what my collection had become. And I knew that when I left Texas, I was first going to have to go back to Louisiana and then come back to Japan. So I would have to move all that stuff to Louisiana and then again to Japan. And it was just a lot of stuff, and not just like the logistics of boxing all that stuff up and sending it, but also just how expensive it is. I mean, obviously the more weight you have, the more expensive shipping is going to be. So while I was in Texas, I literally sold 300 pounds of video games as in weight, 300 pounds in weight of video games that I sold to, I sold a bunch of it, most of it to a local retro game store, and then another big hunk of that was just to people in the area, people that were on the base that collected video games, and some stuff that I sold online through Facebook groups and things like that. So I pared my collection down by 300 pounds because, you know, when I looked through it, there was a lot of stuff in there that I bought for whatever reason at a certain point in time, and then I just didn't want anymore. At one point I had the idea that I was going to try to acquire a full Japanese Dreamcast set. And I don't know what got that idea in my head, but when I took a look at my Dreamcast collection, I realized that there were a lot of games in that collection that I didn't play and didn't really care to own. I had a lot of dating sims and visual novels and other like horse racing simulators and sports games and all these games that I would never ever play. I just bought them because they were super cheap, and for whatever reason I wanted a complete Dreamcast collection. So I took all of the stuff that I had gotten for the Dreamcast and the PlayStation and the Saturn and Mega Drive and Famicom. I had a whole bunch of games in all of those different, for all those different systems that I didn't play, and I bought them for like collection purposes, just because, I don't know, you get into that mode where like you start buying games and it becomes kind of addictive. And when you're someone like me who has a tendency to like compulsively buy and collect things, when you're surrounded by all those hard-off stores and video game shops where you can just buy an unlimited number of video games and you've got all this expendable income, like that's a bad combination. You end up blowing a whole ton of money on a whole bunch of things you don't really need. So I took a look at my collection. I said there's all this stuff in here that I don't play and I don't really need in my collection. So I took a whole bunch of that stuff, sold it, cut the shipping weight down by 300 pounds. So it was still expensive to ship it all, but it wasn't as expensive as it would be. And so those are the two times I've either purged a collection or left a collection behind entirely. And at some point in the future, it is very likely that I will pare down my collection again, because there's still, you know, games in my collection, because it's a pretty decent sized collection at this point still. And I do still occasionally buy new games. I try to only buy games that I really want and I intend to play. But with this many games in a single collection, you're not going to play everything. So there's still plenty of stuff on my shelves that I don't ever really play, and I don't really feel like I need in my collection. And with space being limited and with money being limited, it's very likely that I will sell a chunk of my collection off again at some point. Unless like the day comes where I just have like unlimited money and I want for nothing, and I'll never need to sell another video game again. Like if that day came, then sure, you know, and I lived in a big enough place, fine, more games the better. I'll just buy up all these, you know, games and I'll just have them as like a nice, you know, collection. And they can all sit there on a shelf, and I can just look at it and feel all warm and fuzzy inside. But until the day comes that I am obscenely rich, there will almost certainly come a day where I start selling off some pieces of my collection again. A purge, as Monty put it. Yeah, so I have purged. I likely will purge again. The word purge is just, I don't know, like, I think of, like, gross stuff like farts and things when I hear the word purge, but there you go. I have purged my collection, very likely will again, and again, those are the motivators. It's space, and it's money, and if you need space and money more than you need those games, then, you know, bite the bullet, sell some of them. I know it's hard, I know, for, like, a grown man. It's, maybe there's something kind of childish about being so clingy to video games, to hunks of plastic, you know. But I can't help it. It's in there. It's in my psyche. When I was a kid, I wanted every video game in the world. And as an adult, I had the opportunity not to buy every video game in the world, but at least all the video games that I wanted for the most part. Some of them are still out of reach. But you got to overcome that attachment to things, and you got to prioritize, people. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not always very good at it. Sometimes I'm actually very bad at prioritizing needs over wants. But that's what you got to do, and I'm gonna probably have to come to that conclusion again at some point. And when space and money and need outweighs your attachment to your material possessions, that's when you gotta purge, people. You gotta start selling some stuff off. Anyway, that's about all I have to say on the topic. Thank you again, Monty on the Run, for asking me so many damn questions, giving me stuff to talk about. Anybody else, you want to ask me any questions, anything at all, you can always put them in the comments section of these videos. You can contact me on Facebook. You can submit questions on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram. Links to all of that stuff, all that great social media stuff that keeps us all connected. All of that can be found down in the description, so go and check those out. If you haven't already followed me on Twitter and Instagram, I would encourage you to. I get on there and I share videos and photos and other various kinds of things if you're interested in that kind of stuff. And again, you can contact me on those platforms, and if you got questions or comments, or if you just want to shoot me a message and say hello, or if you're coming to Japan and you want to hang out or something, I get a lot of messages like that, people that come for a visit and they want to meet up, grab a beer, maybe go look for some video games. I'm always up for that, so you can always contact me. I'm a very open person that way. It's perfectly alright to come and say hi if that's what you want to do. Anyway, again, thanks, Monty, for your question. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Take care. I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.